So we have the lunar cycle that we're going to be covering today. The lunar cycle is essentially the different changes that the moon's going to have occur due to the sun and how it illuminates it. For our first activity, I want you to pull out your journal. We're going to write about what we would do if the moon was changing different shapes and different colors. So you're going to decide right now what you would do and how you would act if you saw that. I'm going to give you time right now to pause the video. You can do that throughout the slideshow if you need to catch up or go back, but I'm going to move on to the next slide. Here we have the different phases of the lunar cycle. From the bottom left, we have almost a fully illuminated moon that goes to the very bottom right, which would be an almost non-existent or not very illuminated moon. This is important because it dates back to prehistoric uses. Back then they didn't have calendars, so the Chinese, Sumerians, and Babylonians used the moon to know what day, month, and year it was. We're going to take a small mini activity that we're going to do as we go through the slideshow. You're going to use Oreos, and as we progress, you're going to build the phases of the moon with your Oreo, as you can see in the picture to the right. You can pause to get a brief look at it, and you can also pause when we get to those certain slides so you can catch up, take a picture, and email it to me. There are 4 phases of the lunar cycle. These are the first 2. So we have the new moon on the bottom left. This is when the moon isn't illuminated at all, as you can see. On the right, we have the first quarter moon, when the right half is illuminated. A fun fact is that a new moon can still have a portion illuminated. This is seen in this picture where that bottom right is still showing the sun shining on it. The last 2 phases of the lunar cycle are the full moon and the last quarter. The full moon is when the entire moon is illuminated, as you can see, and the last quarter is when the left half of the moon is illuminated. An important note to remember is that the lunar cycle always starts from the right side of the moon and goes to the left side of the moon. And in pictures it may be depicted as a little bit slanted, up or down, but it always goes from right to left. In this picture, we learn that the phase changes take about a week, more or less. So it'll take about a week for each phase to occur. We also have auxiliary phases in the lunar cycle. We have the crescent phase, which is when less than half of the moon is full. That's from right to left, as I said, and you can see that it's starting from the bottom going up because it has that slant. Then we have the gibbous phase. That's when more than half is full, and that's from right to left. And as you can see from here, it's from the bottom right, top right to the bottom left, and it's slanted, as I mentioned earlier. When we describe phase changes, we have waxing. This is when the moon appears to be growing, and we have waning, when the moon appears to be shrinking. We also have abnormal moons, the first one being the lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse is when the Earth blocks out the sun and the moon turns red. A solar eclipse is when the moon blocks out the sun to the Earth, and you can see both pictures below. These ones you don't have to make with your Oreos, so don't worry about that. Fun fact, folklore has taken a spin on the full moon. Can you predict what this is? So that was a picture of a werewolf. It has been included in folklore for quite a while. They always revolve around full moons. That's when they change into a werewolf. There's a couple rules that apply, as you can see on the bottom 3 bullet points. The first being that werewolves will always transform under a full moon. The second, occasionally, they will only be forced to transform under a full moon, but can change into a werewolf whenever they want. The third rule being that when you sleep under a full moon's light and it shines on your face, you are going to become a werewolf, and that's the only predecessor requirement for that. In modern times, when it comes to full moons, we have researchers and psychologists that used to think that the full moon had a lunar effect, that you would be more aggressive, more angry, more upset. Different emotions would be amplified under the full moon. Studies were included in the 1900s to figure out if this was a real thing or not, and they quickly realized that there was no correlation or no effect, meaning that that was not something that existed. So it still has prevalence today in what we're studying, and that is all. I hope you learned a lot about the lunar cycle.